What if I told you that behind the palace gates, the most dangerous battle raging right now isn't about politics, diplomacy, or even succession, but about children? Imagine a brother looking his father in the eye and saying, "Erase William's children. Replace them with mine." Sounds unthinkable, doesn't it? But that's exactly what insiders claim Prince Harry has urged King Charles to do, to rewrite the royal will, to push Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis aside, and to secure Archie and Lilibet's names in the foundation of the monarchy. Now pause for a moment and let that sink in. We're not talking about titles or press clippings. We're talking about the ultimate inheritance, wealth, property, and symbolic power that stretches back centuries. This isn't just a squabble over who gets the spare bedroom at Balmoral. This is about rewriting the royal future itself. And the man standing in Harry's way? His brother, Prince William. A man who, after years of staying silent, is said to have finally made a move that could alter his relationship with Harry forever. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But how did we get here? How does a family feud escalate to this level? Let's rewind. The seeds of this story were planted long before Meghan, long before Megxit, even long before Diana's tragic death. This is a tale of rivalry, jealousy, inheritance, and betrayal. The royal family has always been obsessed with legacy. Every will written, every title handed down, every piece of land signed over is about more than money. It's about who belongs and who doesn't. And Harry, whether consciously or not, has always carried the burden of being the spare. Think about it. William was groomed to rule, to inherit, to be the golden child. Harry? He was the backup plan. The spare tire you only pull out when things go wrong. And now, decades later, that resentment seems to be resurfacing in its most dramatic form. But here's the shocking part. This isn't just about Harry fighting for his kids. Some say this is about Meghan's influence, about a carefully calculated push to secure Archie and Lilibet's future, not in America, not in Hollywood, but inside the palace halls they supposedly walked away from. Why? Because power, once tasted, is impossible to forget. Now, let's bring it back to today. Charles is king, but his health is under constant speculation. The question of his will isn't a distant matter, it's urgent. Which children will be secured? Which grandchildren will be locked into history? Which names will be written in ink, and which erased? That's the backdrop against which Harry made his plea. And the timing? Convenient, some say, because William's children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, are now firmly cemented in the public's heart. George is the heir in training. Charlotte, the confident, outspoken spare of the spare. Louis, the cheeky one who steals headlines with every balcony wave. Removing them from the royal will would be more than cold. It would be catastrophic. So ask yourself, why would Harry risk everything, his reputation, his fragile truce with Charles, his brother's fury, to make such a demand? Was it greed? Desperation? Or was it the final chapter in a long story of sibling rivalry? Picture the scene. Charles, frail but still sharp, listening to Harry's words. Meghan in the background, perhaps nodding, perhaps prompting. The mention of Archie and Lilibet's names echoing through the air. And William? Hearing whispers of it all, his blood boiling, realizing that his children had become pawns in a transatlantic chess game. This isn't just drama. This is war within the House of Windsor. And when a family war breaks out in that palace, history tells us the casualties are never random. Let's break this down even further. If Harry truly believes Archie and Lilibet deserve to be prioritized, then what does that say about how he views Charlotte and Louis? These are innocent children, born into a role they never asked for. Yet Harry, their uncle, is said to be willing to cut them off, to overwrite their futures for his own bloodline. That's not just betrayal. That's the kind of wound that scars for generations. And here's where the audience comes in. Think about your own family. What would happen if a sibling demanded your children be disinherited, replaced, erased? Could you forgive? Could you forget? Now, layer onto that the legacy of Diana. The woman who fought to protect her boys, who saw them as equals, who tried desperately to shield them from this very kind of rivalry. What would Diana think if she could see her sons now? Would she see Harry as defending his children, or as repeating the mistakes of the past? Would she see William as protecting the monarchy, or as hardening into the coldness she once feared? And let's not forget, this isn't happening in a vacuum. The press, the public, the commentators, the courtiers, they all watch every move. When whispers of Harry's request leaked, they weren't seen as a private family squabble. They were seen as proof of the deep fracture splitting the Windsors in two. Suddenly, Meghan's influence became a talking point again. Suddenly, Archie and Lilibet weren't just California children living quietly with their parents. They were chess pieces in a royal game of thrones. But here's the twist. Charles himself is no stranger to controversial wills. Remember, as Prince of Wales, he often spoke about reshaping the monarchy, slimming it down, deciding who's in and who's out. What if Harry thought he could leverage that vision? What if Meghan believed now was their best chance to secure a legacy for their children? If Charles was even slightly swayed, even slightly torn, the ripple effects would be enormous. And that's where William steps in. William, who has tolerated Harry's interviews, his Netflix specials, his memoirs, his accusations. William, who has bitten his tongue for years while Harry burned every bridge. But this was different. This wasn't about gossip or public image. This was about his children. And for William, that was the final red line. So here we are. A family torn in two. A father caught in the middle. A brother making an unthinkable request. Another brother preparing a final, decisive move. And all of it happening against the backdrop of a monarchy already questioned, already fragile, already struggling to stay relevant in the modern age. But if you think you've heard the worst of it, think again. Because Harry's request wasn't just outrageous, it carried a hidden agenda. An agenda that, once revealed, explains why William's response had to be so brutal, so final, so unforgettable. And what was that agenda? Well, that's where this story takes its darkest turn. Because behind every plea, behind every demand, there's always something deeper, something nobody saw coming, something that, once uncovered, changes everything we thought we knew about this royal war. And that's where we go next. The conversation no one was supposed to hear. That's how it all begins. Behind closed doors, in hushed tones, a request was made that could shake the monarchy at its very core. Prince Harry, according to palace insiders, urged his father, King Charles himself, to make the unthinkable change in his royal will. Replace Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis with Archie and Lilibet. Erase William's younger children from the royal future and write in his own. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself, how does something like this even get leaked? The palace is a fortress when it comes to secrecy. Conversations between the king and his sons are supposed to be sacred. Yet somehow, this one slipped through. A whisper here, a suspicious staff member there. And before long, the press was buzzing with rumors that Harry had crossed a line no royal has dared cross in centuries, meddling in the inheritance of the crown's future generations. Picture it. Charles, sitting in his study at Clarence House, the weight of history pressing down on him. He's a father, yes, but he's also a king. And on the other side of that desk sits Harry, his youngest son, pleading for something Charles knows will set his family ablaze. It's only fair, Pa Archie and Lilibet deserve it as much as Charlotte and Louis. The words hang heavy, because fairness is a dangerous word in royal circles. The monarchy doesn't run on fairness. It runs on tradition, bloodlines, and duty. Let's dig deeper into why this request is so explosive. Royal wills aren't just about money. They are symbolic maps of the monarchy's priorities. They tell the world who matters, who belongs, and who doesn't. They lock names into history, ensuring they're remembered for centuries to come. When Harry demanded Archie and Lilibet be placed above Charlotte and Louis, it wasn't just a father asking for his children's future. It was a man trying to rewrite the royal narrative. And that's where the scandal grows. Because Charlotte isn't just William's daughter. She is the first girl in modern history who will not be leapfrogged by her younger brother in succession. The law was changed for her. The monarchy itself bent to make sure she would remain ahead of Louis. To remove her now, it would undo years of progress, of symbolic change, of promises made to the people of Britain. And Louis? He may be the youngest, the cheekiest, the so-called spare of the spare, but he is still the beating heart of William and Catherine's family. To erase him would feel like erasing Diana's legacy itself. So how did this request come to light? According to whispers, it was through a private aide who overheard fragments of the conversation and couldn't believe their ears. Imagine being that aide. One moment, you're pouring tea or shuffling papers. The next, you hear Harry suggesting the king cross out the names of his grandchildren. It's the kind of thing you don't forget. The kind of thing that keeps you awake at night. And eventually, someone talks. Because in the palace, secrets are currency. Now here's where it gets darker. Reports suggest that Harry didn't come to Charles empty-handed. He came with arguments. Convincing, emotional, strategic arguments. He told Charles that Archie and Lilibet would be symbols of modern royalty. A mixed-race prince and princess, born into a new world, representing change and progress. That keeping them on the sidelines while Charlotte and Louis inherited would make the monarchy look outdated, even discriminatory. He played on Charles's greatest weakness, his desire to modernize, to prove the monarchy still has a place in the 21st century. But behind those arguments was another, unspoken truth. If Archie and Lilibet were prioritized, Meghan and Harry would be secured. Their California exile would no longer be an exile. They would once again have a foot firmly in the royal door. And that's what William could never allow. Think of the irony here. Harry, once known as the fun-loving spare, is now the man trying to manipulate the very system he once claimed to despise. He said he hated titles. He said he wanted freedom. He said he wanted to raise his children outside the suffocating walls of the monarchy. And yet here he was, begging his father to write Archie and Lilibet into the center of the crown's wealth and inheritance. Hypocrisy? Desperation? Or both? And consider the timing. Charles is facing constant speculation about his health. Rumors swirl about his energy, his stamina, his ability to carry the weight of kingship. The question of his will is no longer theoretical. It's pressing. It's immediate. If Harry could influence him now, while he's vulnerable, the changes might be permanent. Once written, they would stand. And William would be forced to watch as his children's inheritance was snatched from them by their uncle's ambition. But here's the thing about leaks. They don't happen by accident. They happen for a reason. Someone, somewhere, wanted the world to know what Harry asked for. Was it a palace aide disgusted by what they heard? Was it Charles himself, subtly leaking the story to gauge public reaction? Or was it William, furious and determined to expose Harry's betrayal before it went any further? We may never know for sure. But what we do know is this. Once the leak was out, the damage was irreversible. Public reaction was swift. Outrage, disbelief, fury. How could Harry, the man who walked away from the monarchy, who gave up his duties, who cashed in on his royal name in California, dare to dictate the future of the crown? And how could he do it at the expense of children who had done nothing wrong? Charlotte and Louis became symbols of innocence under attack. And Archie and Lilibet? Suddenly, their names were dragged into the ugliest of family feuds. This is where William's rage began to simmer. Imagine hearing that your brother not only insulted you, not only abandoned you, not only accused your wife of cruelty, but now wanted your children erased from the king's will. That's not just betrayal. That's war. And here's the kicker. Some insiders claim Meghan was behind the push, that she saw the will as a golden ticket, that she encouraged Harry to make the demand, framing it as justice for their children. If that's true, then this isn't just Harry versus William. It's Meghan versus Kate, Meghan versus the monarchy, Meghan versus the system itself. But regardless of who masterminded it, the leak of Harry's request set in motion a chain of events that could never be undone. Trust between the brothers collapsed further. Charles was thrown into turmoil, and the public saw, once again, the true fracture inside the royal family. Yet here's the part that nobody expected. The leak didn't just expose Harry's request. It exposed the king's hesitation. Because Charles didn't immediately shut Harry down. He listened. He considered. He wavered. And that hesitation gave William the opening he needed to act. And act he did. Because William knew one thing for certain. If Harry was bold enough to make this request once, he'd do it again. If Charles entertained it now, he might entertain it tomorrow. And William's children would always be at risk. That's why William's final move became inevitable. But before we get there, we have to understand why Archie and Lilibet were at the heart of this controversy, and why Harry was so determined to push them into the will at all costs. Because the story of the leaked request is only the beginning. What comes next? That's where the stakes get even higher. That's where family lines blur. And that's where betrayal cuts the deepest. But what Harry didn't see coming was the storm his request would unleash. And once William heard about it, there was no turning back. What does it really mean to be born into royalty, but to live outside it? That's the strange paradox of Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, Harry and Meghan's two children. On one hand, their bloodline ties them directly to the heart of the British monarchy. On the other, their California upbringing distances them from the gilded traditions, the centuries of protocol, the inherited responsibilities that shaped every Windsor child before them. And yet, when Harry urged King Charles to prioritize his children over Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis in the royal will, Archie and Lilibet's role in the royal legacy suddenly became the center of one of the most explosive debates the monarchy has ever faced. Let's rewind to the beginning. Archie was born in May 2019, and from the very start, controversy surrounded his place in the royal family. Meghan and Harry chose not to immediately share a traditional hospital photo, breaking with decades of royal precedent. The world was left guessing, asking questions. And then came the christening, or rather, the private christening. No public photographs. No chance for the press to see the godparents. Everything cloaked in secrecy. Already, Archie's royal role was being shaped in a way no Windsor childs had before. Now, when Lilibet was born in June 2021, the stakes were even higher. Meghan and Harry had already exited royal duties, moved across the Atlantic, and set up their new lives in Montecito. Yet they still named their daughter after the Queen herself. Lilibet, Elizabeth's most intimate family nickname. Was it a tribute? A peace offering? Or was it a strategic claim, ensuring their daughter's name would forever be linked to the monarch, no matter how far she lived from Buckingham Palace? Here's the irony. Meghan and Harry insisted they wanted freedom for their children. Freedom from royal titles. Freedom from the cameras. Freedom from the constant scrutiny. And yet, when the dust settled, they accepted titles for both Archie and Lilibet, Prince and Princess. They may live thousands of miles from the throne, but their names are now cemented in royal history. That contradiction speaks volumes. Do you really walk away if you're still holding onto the titles you swore you didn't need? Now let's talk about legacy. In the monarchy, legacy isn't just about the line of succession. It's about visibility. It's about being written into the story. George, Charlotte, and Louis are already playing their roles. George as the heir in training, standing tall beside his father at state occasions. Charlotte, the confident and poised young princess, reminding everyone of Diana's spirit. Louis, cheeky and full of energy, stealing headlines with every balcony wave. They are part of the fabric of the monarchy, shaping its image every time the cameras turn their way. But Archie and Lilibet, they're invisible. They don't appear on the balcony. They don't attend Trooping the Color. They don't wave Union Jacks at royal parades. Their legacy, for now, is defined by absence. And absence, in the monarchy, is dangerous. Because the monarchy thrives on visibility, on constant reinforcement of who belongs and who doesn't. By staying away, Archie and Lilibet risk being forgotten by the very system their parents claim they still deserve a place in. And that brings us to Harry's plea. By asking Charles to prioritize his children in the will, Harry was trying to rewrite that absence, to carve their names into stone, even if they aren't physically there. He wanted the will to be a declaration. Archie and Lilibet are not outsiders. They are Windsor blood. They are heirs to the royal legacy, no matter where they live. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. In pushing for Archie and Lilibet, Harry was effectively pushing against Charlotte and Louis. And that's where public sympathy splintered. Because Charlotte and Louis didn't choose to be in the spotlight. They didn't choose to embody the traditions of the crown. They were born into it, just as Archie and Lilibet were. Yet Harry's demand positioned them as the expendable ones, the children who could be erased. Think about Charlotte in particular. She's only 8 years old, yet she's already proven herself as one of the most confident young royals in generations. Remember her at Queen Elizabeth's funeral, standing tall beside her mother, reminding William to bow at the right time? Remember her correcting George at public events, showing her natural leadership? She is the first girl in modern royal history to keep her place in succession over a younger brother. She symbolizes progress. And yet, Harry's request would strip her of that symbolism entirely. How could William ever forgive that? And then there's Louis. Playful, full of life, the royal wild card. He may not hold the weight of succession like his siblings, but he represents something vital, joy. For the public, Louis is the reminder that royals are human, that children are children, even under the crown's heavy shadow. To remove him would feel cruel. It would feel calculated. It would feel like a betrayal of Diana's belief that both her boys and their children deserved equal love. Now let's circle back to Archie and Lilibet. Their legacy is not just about being Harry's children. It's about being Meghan's. They are the first biracial prince and princess in British royal history. That fact alone gives them enormous symbolic weight. And Harry knew it. When he spoke to Charles, he wasn't just asking for money or security. He was asking the king to embrace the narrative of modernity, to prove to the world that the monarchy is truly inclusive. It was a strategic move, and it carried emotional weight. But here's the catch. By trying to uplift his children's role in history, Harry inadvertently framed them against Charlotte and Louis. And in doing so, he didn't just spark anger from William. He sparked suspicion from the entire royal machinery. Because once you pit child against child, legacy against legacy, you're no longer protecting your family. You're weaponizing them. And that is a dangerous game. Ask yourself this. Did Harry truly believe this move would succeed? Or was he gambling? Perhaps he thought Charles's guilt would tip the scales. Perhaps Meghan convinced him that now, with the king newly crowned and his health in question, was the perfect time to strike. Or perhaps Harry believed the monarchy was so desperate to modernize that they'd sacrifice Charlotte and Louis without a second thought. Whatever the case, Archie and Lilibet's role in the royal legacy has now been defined not by what they've done, but by what their father demanded. They are names caught in the middle of a storm, symbols of a modern monarchy on one side, and symbols of betrayal on the other. And while they may be too young to understand it now, history will remember them not as innocent children, but as the centerpieces of one of the crown's darkest feuds. And that's where the tension boils over. Because William may have stayed silent when Harry criticized his marriage. He may have bitten his tongue when Harry trashed his wife. He may have ignored the endless Netflix specials, podcasts, and interviews. But when it came to Charlotte and Louis, that was the final straw. That was the point of no return. Because Harry's children may represent progress, but William's children represent survival. And survival, in the monarchy, always wins. But Harry didn't see it that way. For him, this was about justice, about correcting a system that had always favored his brother, about ensuring that the wounds of the past didn't fall onto the next generation. For Harry, it was all or nothing. But for William, it was simple. Touch my children, and you'll regret it. And that's why the stage was set for William's final move. Because once Archie and Lilibet were pitted against Charlotte and Louis, there was no turning back, no reconciliation, no middle ground. Only a clash that would define the Windsor family for years to come. But before William could act, one more question had to be answered. Why Charlotte and Louis? Why did Harry target them specifically, leaving George out of the demand? The answer to that question reveals everything about his strategy and everything about the storm still to come. And what that answer uncovers will leave you stunned. Why Charlotte? Why Louis? Out of all the grandchildren of King Charles, why did Harry single them out in his plea to the king? Why not George, the heir in training, the boy whose destiny is already sealed as a future monarch? Why target the younger two, the so-called spares of the heir? That's the chilling question at the heart of this next chapter. And the answer reveals not only Harry's strategy, but also the deepest wound in his own royal story. Let's set the scene. George, Charlotte, and Louis. The Cambridge trio, William and Catherine's pride and joy. To the public, they're symbols of the monarchy's continuity, the fresh faces that reassure Britain and the Commonwealth that the Windsor dynasty has a future. George carries the heavy weight of duty. Charlotte brings balance with her sharp wit and poise, and Louis, with his cheeky grin, keeps the monarchy human. Together, they represent stability. But what happens when one of their own bloodline, their uncle, sees them not as children, but as obstacles? Harry's alleged demand to King Charles wasn't random. He didn't ask for George to be replaced. That would have been impossible, unthinkable, a direct assault on the throne itself. George's role is untouchable. But Charlotte and Louis? To Harry, they may have looked vulnerable, replaceable, symbols of a system that always elevated the heir while sidelining the spares. And that's where Harry's own pain seeps in. Because wasn't he once in that exact same role? The shadow beside the heir. The backup plan. The insurance policy. He was William's Louis. He was Charlotte's counterpart. Always close enough to the spotlight to feel the heat, but never close enough to claim the fire for himself. And so, when Harry looked at Charlotte and Louis, maybe he didn't just see his niece and nephew. Maybe he saw himself. And maybe that made them targets, because deep down, he believed that if the system erased him, then it could erase them too. But here's the heartbreaking truth. Charlotte and Louis are innocent. They're children. They didn't choose to be born into this family. They didn't choose to represent the monarchy. They didn't choose to become pawns in a war between brothers. And yet, because of Harry's plea, that's exactly what they became. Let's look closer at Charlotte. From the moment she was born, she was historic. She became the first girl in British royal history not to be pushed aside by a younger brother. For centuries, boys outranked girls, no matter their birth order. But when Parliament changed the succession laws, Charlotte became a symbol of progress. She was Diana's granddaughter, strong, determined, confident, and she held her place, even above Louis. That law change wasn't just legal. It was symbolic. It told the world, this monarchy adapts, it modernizes, it respects daughters as much as sons. Now imagine stripping that away. Imagine removing Charlotte from Charles's will, casting her aside so Archie and Lilibet could take her place. What message would that send? That progress was just a performance? That girls in the monarchy still don't matter? That Diana's granddaughter could be erased with the stroke of a pen? And then there's Louis, the cheeky, mischievous youngest child. He may never sit on the throne, but in the eyes of the public, he's priceless. He's the humanizing face of the monarchy. The little boy pulling faces on the balcony during the Platinum Jubilee. The one tugging at Kate's hand during solemn processions. He reminds people that behind the pomp and ceremony, these are still children. Living, breathing children. Removing Louis from the will wouldn't just be cruel. It would be a public relations disaster. It would tell the world that the monarchy eats its own. So why did Harry target them? Because targeting George was impossible. Because targeting William directly was too obvious. But Charlotte and Louis? In Harry's eyes, they were vulnerable. They were spares. And if he could persuade Charles to prioritize Archie and Lilibet over them, then he would have done what the monarchy never did for him. He would have elevated the spares. Only this time, the spares would be his children. Now pause for a moment. Think about what this means for William. His daughter, his son, innocent, trusting, unaware, suddenly under attack by their own uncle. Not just through words, but through an attempt to erase their place in the family's future. How could any father accept that? How could any brother forgive that? This is where the story takes on a darker tone. Because Charlotte and Louis are more than William's children. They're Catherine's children. And Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has been a steady, silent protector from the very beginning. She endured years of Meghan's accusations, years of Harry's public barbs. But when Charlotte's name was dragged into the feud, when her daughter was positioned as expendable, Kate's quiet resolve turned to steel. Sources whisper that she told William, enough is enough. Protect the children. End this feud once and for all. And that's exactly what William prepared to do. But here's the twist. Before William could make his final move, the palace itself was buzzing with unease. Staffers, courtiers, and insiders couldn't believe what they had heard. For centuries, the monarchy has survived betrayal, scandal, even abdication. But a royal uncle demanding his nieces and nephews be erased? That was unprecedented. It was a betrayal so deep that it shook even the hardened hearts inside Buckingham Palace. Let's add another layer. Charlotte and Louis's visibility has only grown in recent years. At Queen Elizabeth's funeral, Charlotte stood beside her mother, a tiny figure of dignity and composure, reminding her brother George to bow at the coffin. The cameras caught it. The world noticed. She was 8 years old, and yet she was already embodying the role of a working royal. Louis, meanwhile, continues to steal every event he attends. His infectious joy makes headlines. His presence connects the royal family to the people in a way no adult ever could. To erase them would not only wound William personally, it would damage the very public face of the monarchy. And Harry? Perhaps he underestimated this. Perhaps he believed that because Charlotte and Louis were secondary, they could be shifted aside without outrage. But the opposite happened. By targeting them, he turned public sympathy against himself. He reminded the world of his own bitterness as the spare. He exposed the very hypocrisy he has always tried to deny. Let's not forget, Diana once told her sons she wanted them to remain close, to protect each other. She wanted William to care for Harry, and Harry to support William. Yet here we are, decades later, and Harry is the one trying to strip William's children of their future. Diana's wish shattered, her legacy betrayed. And so we arrive at the breaking point. William could forgive many things. He could stomach Harry's interviews. He could endure Meghan's accusations. He could grit his teeth through Netflix documentaries, podcasts, and memoirs. But this? An attack on his daughter, his son, his flesh and blood? That was unforgivable. That was the line Harry crossed. Which brings us to the heart of this story. Because Charlotte and Louis may be innocent targets, but their targeting triggered William's final move. And that move would not only protect his children, but also send Harry and Meghan a message so powerful that it would reverberate through the monarchy for years to come. But what exactly was that move? How far was William willing to go to defend his family? And what role did King Charles play when he saw his grandchildren caught in the crossfire? The answers are coming. But the moment the king's dilemma became clear, the battle between his sons entered uncharted territory. A king, a father, a man caught between blood and duty. That's where Charles found himself when Harry's plea and William's fury landed squarely in his lap. Imagine it. The monarch who waited his entire life to wear the crown, now sitting at his desk, realizing the most dangerous threat to his reign wasn't Parliament, wasn't the press, wasn't even public opinion. It was his own sons, his own flesh and blood. And at the center of the storm? For innocent children, pulled into a battle they never asked for. Let's paint the picture. Charles is no stranger to family drama. His entire life has been defined by it. The scandal of his marriage to Diana, the public's disdain for Camilla, the endless tabloid wars that made him seem aloof, cold, even unfit to rule. Yet nothing could have prepared him for this moment. One son demanding his children be elevated, the other son outraged that his children were being targeted. A tug of war not over policy, not over tradition, but over a will. His will. His legacy. Think about the weight of that. When Charles signs his will, he isn't just deciding who inherits jewelry, estates, or titles. He's writing history. He's shaping the monarchy's next chapter. Every name, every clause, every property listed will be dissected by historians for centuries. And now, that will is the weapon in a feud between his sons. Can you imagine the torment? A father's instinct pulling one way, a king's duty pulling another. Here's where the cracks begin to show. Charles has always been indecisive, known for waffling, for agonizing over decisions, for bending under pressure. As king, he's tried to project strength, but behind closed doors, he still hesitates. And Harry knows it. That's why Harry chose this moment. A moment when Charles's health is whispered about in hushed tones. A moment when the king is desperate to unify his family, to prove that he is more than just a transitional monarch. Harry gambled that his father's guilt and weakness would work in his favor. But William? William knows his father better than anyone. He knows Charles's tendency to delay, to consider, to avoid confrontation. And he also knows that hesitation could be deadly. If Charles wavered even for a second, Archie and Lilibet could end up in the will at Charlotte and Louis's expense. That's why William's final move became inevitable. But we're not there yet. First, we have to understand the storm raging inside Charles. Let's dig into the precedent. Royal wills have always been sources of controversy. Queen Victoria left instructions that shocked her children. The Queen Mother famously allocated her fortune in ways that secured the future of certain royals while sidelining others. Even Queen Elizabeth II's personal decisions, which remain largely secret, are said to have caused quiet disputes within the family. But this? A son asking a king to erase his grandchildren? This was unprecedented. And then there was Camilla. Never underestimate her presence in this story. As queen consort, she is Charles's ear. She's endured decades of being hated, scrutinized, and vilified. She knows the monarchy better than anyone alive. Its dangers, its fragility, its optics. Can you imagine her reaction when she heard Harry's request? Whispers suggest she was livid, that she told Charles in no uncertain terms, "You cannot do this. You cannot betray William's children." For Camilla, this wasn't just a family matter. This was about survival. If Charles even considered Harry's request, it could destroy what little unity the monarchy has left. But Charles hesitated. He thought about Diana. He thought about the guilt he still carries, About the son, he always felt he failed. Harry was the wounded one, the rebel, the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin with grief etched across his face. Some say Charles has never forgiven himself for the way Harry turned out. That every scandal, every feud, every exile feels like his personal failure as a father. And so, when Harry made his plea, Charles didn't shut it down immediately. He listened. He wavered. And that hesitation was all William needed to lose faith. Because to William, this wasn't about fairness or guilt or reconciliation. It was about survival. The survival of his children. The survival of the monarchy. And Charles's wavering showed William exactly what he feared most, that his father might bend to Harry's will. Now picture the king's daily torment. One moment, aides are briefing him about state dinners, climate initiatives, diplomatic tours. The next, he's being pulled into a family feud that makes all those matters feel trivial. Can you imagine the distraction? The humiliation of knowing the monarchy's biggest scandal isn't external, but internal? That the world isn't laughing at parliament or scandals in government, but at the Windsor family tearing itself apart? Here's the emotional gut punch. Charles is both father and king. As a father, he feels Harry's desperation. He knows the pain of despair. He's seen Harry suffer, lash out, burn bridges. He wants to protect his youngest son, to bring him back into the fold. But as a king, he knows he cannot sacrifice Charlotte and Louis. To do so would destroy William, alienate Kate, and enrage the public. And so he sits in the middle, paralyzed. But paralysis is deadly in a monarchy. Every moment Charles hesitated gave William more reason to act. Every delay confirmed to William that his father wasn't going to protect his children, that he would have to do it himself. And when William acts, he doesn't waver. Now add one more twist. The courtiers. The so-called men in gray suits, who have run the monarchy from the shadows for decades. These aides and advisors have one priority: preserving the institution. For them, it doesn't matter who cries, who pleads, who fights. What matters is stability. And from their perspective, Harry's demand wasn't just outrageous. It was dangerous. It threatened the monarchy's very credibility. Sources suggest that some courtiers began whispering in Charles's ear, "Do not give in. Protect William's line. If you bend now, you will lose everything." So the king stood at a crossroads. On one side, the son he feared losing forever. On the other, the son who would inherit his crown. A choice between guilt and duty, between love and survival. And as Charles wavered, as he agonized, William's resolve hardened. He realized his father might never make the choice he needed him to make. And so, William decided to make it for him. But before William could strike, another voice entered the fray. One that has always been blunt, unflinching, and unafraid to speak the truth, no matter how brutal. Princess Anne, the king's sister. The aunt who has never tolerated nonsense, who has always put duty above drama. And when she weighed in, everything changed. Because Anne's advice didn't just influence Charles. It gave William the final push he needed to deliver the move that would shock Harry and the world. What if Harry's plea to King Charles wasn't entirely his own idea? What if behind every word, every argument, every demand, there was another voice, persuasive, strategic, and determined? Because when you peel back the layers of this scandal, one name surfaces again and again: Meghan Markle. And in Chapter 5, we asked the question no one in the palace dares to say out loud. Was this Harry's desperate attempt to secure his children's legacy, or Meghan's calculated move to win back the influence she lost when they walked away? Let's start with what we know about Meghan. From the very beginning, she has been painted as a woman who understands image, opportunity, and positioning better than anyone else in the royal family. An actress, a strategist, a woman who navigated Hollywood and climbed her way into the most famous family in the world. Call her ambitious. Call her manipulative. Call her visionary. But one thing is undeniable. Meghan knows how to turn narrative into power. Think back to the early days. Meghan wasn't just Harry's girlfriend. She was a woman with her own platform, her own voice, her own connections. She walked into the royal family already knowing how to handle press, how to frame stories, how to control perception. And when she left with Harry, she took that same savvy with her. Netflix deals, Spotify contracts, best-selling books. Everything was framed as their truth. Every word was a weapon. Every story was a headline. Now, apply that same lens to this inheritance drama. Harry may be the one carrying the wounds of the spare, but Meghan is the one who saw the opportunity. Archie and Lilibet aren't just children. They're leverage. They're symbols. The first biracial prince and princess in British history. Their very existence challenges centuries of tradition. And Meghan knew that. She knew their names could become bargaining chips in negotiations not just with Charles, but with the monarchy itself. So when Harry approached Charles, pleading for Archie and Lilibet to replace Charlotte and Louis in the royal will, was it really just Harry speaking? Or was it Meghan pulling the strings? Let's consider the evidence. Meghan has spoken openly about the importance of her children being recognized. Remember the Oprah interview, where she revealed that Archie had been denied the title of prince? The emotion in her voice was clear. To Meghan, this wasn't just about formality. It was about protection, legitimacy, status. She painted it as a matter of security, but many saw it as a deeper obsession with titles and recognition. And when Archie and Lilibet finally did receive their titles after Queen Elizabeth's death, Meghan wasted no time updating their names on the Sussex website. Symbolic? Absolutely. Calculated? Without a doubt. Now imagine Meghan watching from California as Charlotte and Louis take their places beside George on the world stage. State funerals, jubilee celebrations, coronations, photographs that go around the globe. Meanwhile, her children are invisible, tucked away in Montecito, absent from the historic moments that define a generation of royals. Do you think that sat well with her? Or do you think it fueled her determination to push Harry into securing a permanent place for Archie and Lilibet and Charles as well? And here's the contradiction. Meghan has built her brand around the idea that she and Harry escaped the suffocating life of the monarchy, that they didn't want their children to be bound by tradition, titles, or the cruelty of the press. And yet, every move she makes ties Archie and Lilibet back to the crown. Titles, recognition, inheritance, legacy. If freedom was truly the goal, why fight so hard for the very trappings they claim to despise? The answer may be simple, because legacy equals power. And Meghan knows that power can be inherited as surely as jewels or estates. If Archie and Lilibet are written into the king's will, their names etched beside Charlotte and Louis, then Meghan secures influence not just for her children, but for herself. No matter what happens with Harry, no matter how strained their relationship with the palace becomes, Meghan would know her children were untouchable. Let's not forget Meghan's history of carefully timed revelations. Whenever pressure builds, financial strain, media scrutiny, legal battles, suddenly a new story emerges. A leak here, a documentary there. Each revelation is designed to reframe the narrative, to regain control. So when whispers of Harry's plea to Charles emerged, was it really a reckless gamble by Harry? Or was it part of Meghan's ongoing campaign to keep her children, and by extension, herself, relevant in the royal conversation? Now, consider how this looks to William and Kate. From their perspective, Meghan's handprints are all over this. Harry may be the voice, but Meghan is the strategist. And that makes it even more dangerous. Because while William could perhaps forgive his brother for acting out of pain, he cannot forgive Meghan for manipulating the system, for targeting his children, for using Archie and Lilibet as pawns to push Charlotte and Louis aside. And Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has been silent through most of this feud, but those close to her say she is fiercely protective of Charlotte and Louis. For Kate, Meghan's influence isn't just a nuisance. It's a threat to her children's future, to their stability, to the careful balance she and William have tried to create in the spotlight. And if Meghan was indeed the one whispering in Harry's ear, Kate would see it as unforgivable. Here's the cruel irony. Meghan's entire campaign to secure Archie and Lilibet's legacy may have backfired. Instead of elevating her children, the demand exposed them to public scrutiny. Instead of strengthening Harry's bond with Charles, it deepened the cracks. Instead of forcing William to compromise, It drove him to make a final, irreversible move. And that's where the story turns. Because Meghan's influence didn't just shape Harry's plea, it also shaped William's response. If this was Meghan's strategy, then William was determined to prove that strategy would never succeed. And so, with Catherine at his side and in whispering hard truths in his ear, William prepared to strike. But what Meghan didn't anticipate was that William wasn't just fighting for his children. He was fighting for Diana's legacy. And in that fight, there was no room for compromise. Which brings us to the silent figure at the center of this storm. The woman who rarely speaks, but whose presence shapes everything. Catherine, Princess of Wales. Because if Meghan's influence lit the fire, it was Kate's resolve that turned William's simmering rage into action. And once Kate made her feelings clear, there was no turning back. Silence can be louder than words. And in the Windsor family, no one embodies that truth more than Catherine, the Princess of Wales. She doesn't give explosive interviews. She doesn't sit down with Oprah. She doesn't leak bombshell memoirs or record Netflix documentaries. Instead, she watches, listens, and when the time comes, she acts with a quiet, razor-sharp precision that can change everything. And in the feud between William and Harry, Kate's silence has been her greatest weapon. But make no mistake, when Harry's demand threatened Charlotte and Louis, Kate's resolve became the fuel for William's final move. Picture the moment. William, pacing in fury after hearing whispers that Harry had asked their father to replace Charlotte and Louis with Archie and Lilibet in the King's will. His mind racing, his temper boiling. For William, anger comes fast, but action takes calculation. And standing just behind him, calm but unshakable, was Catherine. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rant. She simply looked at her husband and said, "You cannot let this stand." Those 6 words lit the spark. Kate has always been cast as the peacemaker, the steady hand, the loyal wife who helps balance William's volatile side. But in this battle, she wasn't soothing him. She was urging him forward. Because this wasn't about palace politics. It wasn't about the monarchy's survival. It was about her children. And for Kate, nothing, not royal tradition, not family loyalty, not even the king himself, comes before George, Charlotte, and Louis. Let's not forget Kate's history in this family. She entered the royal spotlight slowly, carefully, knowing the scrutiny would be unbearable. She endured the nickname Weighty Katie. She survived years of being dissected, criticized, underestimated. And yet, when she married William, she stepped into her role with grace. Every public smile, every carefully chosen outfit, every family photo has been part of her mission to shield her children. She knows what Diana endured. She knows the cruelty of the press. And she has sworn that Charlotte and Louis will not suffer the same way. So when Meghan's influence crept into the picture, when Harry dared to pit his children against hers, Kate's patience evaporated. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. And here's the part no one outside the palace truly understands. Kate is far more strategic than she appears. She doesn't give speeches about her power. She doesn't make demands in front of cameras. But insiders whisper that behind closed doors, she is William's most trusted advisor. His anchor, his confidant, his sounding board. When William wrestled with Harry's betrayal, it wasn't Charles he turned to. It wasn't Anne. It wasn't even his closest friends. It was Kate. And her words cut through the noise. Protect the children. Now imagine the fury boiling beneath her calm surface. She's watched Meghan criticize her in interviews. She's seen Meghan reduce her to headlines and gossip. She's had to swallow accusations, endure Netflix portrayals, and read memoir pages painting her as cold, cruel, complicit. And through it all, she said nothing. She smiled. She carried on. She kept the palace motto alive. Never complain, never explain. But the moment her children were dragged in, that was the red line. That was the moment Catherine, the silent princess, became Catherine the lioness. And this wasn't just about protecting Charlotte and Louis. It was about preserving Diana's legacy. Diana's entire struggle was to shield William and Harry from the monarchy's cruelty. She wanted them to grow up as equals, to share the burden, to support each other. And now, decades later, Harry had shattered that dream by targeting William's children. For Kate, this wasn't just betrayal of family. It was betrayal of Diana's memory. And she wasn't going to let that betrayal go unanswered. Here's the irony. Meghan has often been portrayed as the outspoken, disruptive force, the woman who won't be silenced, who challenges the crown. Kate, by contrast, is painted as dutiful, quiet, even submissive. But in this battle, the roles were reversed. Meghan may have pushed Harry into making the demand, but Kate's quiet resolve pushed William into making his final move. Meghan wielded noise. Kate wielded silence. And in the end, silence proved stronger. Think about the moments we've seen of Kate with her children. At Queen Elizabeth's funeral, holding Charlotte's hand as the young princess fought back tears. At Trooping the Color, gently guiding Louis as he wriggled and waved. At the coronation, standing tall with George, Charlotte, and Louis lined up in perfect order. Every one of those moments was calculated. Every one of them told the world, these children are secure. These children are protected. These children belong. To rip them from Charles's would not just undermine Kate's work. It would make her entire mission meaningless. And Kate was not about to let that happen. So what did she do? She hardened William. She told him that forgiveness was no longer an option, that his brother's betrayal wasn't just about the two of them. It was about Charlotte. It was about Louis. It was about their future. And once Kate said those words, William's path was sealed. But Kate didn't stop there. Behind the scenes, she began strengthening her alliances. With Anne, the aunt who had always respected her no-nonsense approach. With courtiers who trusted her steadiness over Charles's indecision. With the public, who see her as the modern face of the monarchy, the mother who embodies both tradition and progress. In this way, Kate wasn't just protecting her children. She was positioning herself, in them, as untouchable. And perhaps most chillingly of all, Kate's silence itself became a weapon against Meghan. Every time Meghan spoke, Kate said nothing. Every time Meghan accused, Kate smiled. Every time Meghan made noise, Kate remained still. And in that contrast, the public saw strength. They saw dignity. They saw resolve. And that resolve only grew stronger when Harry's plea threatened her children. This is the side of Kate the world rarely sees. Not just the princess in gowns and jewels. Not just the smiling mother on the balcony, but the strategist, the protector, the woman who will do whatever it takes to shield her children from the very system that chewed Diana alive. And when Harry targeted Charlotte and Louis, Kate's resolve became unbreakable. So when William finally made his move, it wasn't just his decision. It was theirs. A husband and wife united, determined, unstoppable. Harry had Meghan whispering in his ear. William had Catherine's silent strength behind him. And in a battle between noise and silence, the silent force often wins. But before William could act, there was another figure whose words would shape his decision. A figure who has never been afraid to call out nonsense, to cut through the drama, to speak truth even when it hurts. Princess Anne. And when she entered the conversation, her blunt honesty gave William the clarity he needed to deliver his final blow. Blunt, uncompromising, fearless. That's Princess Anne. In a family where so many tiptoe around one another, where words are measured and silences carry more weight than speeches, and is the exception. She doesn't soften her opinions. She doesn't dance around truth. She delivers it like a blade, sharp, direct, undeniable. And when Harry's shocking request to replace Charlotte and Louis with Archie and Lilibet reached her ears, she didn't hold back. Her counsel to Charles and William didn't just cut through the noise. It changed the game, and has always been the outlier in the royal family. The only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, she grew up knowing she'd never sit on the throne. She was never the heir, never the focus of dynastic pressure. But that distance gave her a freedom her brothers never had, and could say what she thought. She could strip away the nonsense of protocol and call out the reality beneath. And she did, again and again, for decades. That reputation made her invaluable. If and gave advice, you listened, even if you didn't like it. Now imagine the moment William and Charles turned to her, caught in the crossfire of Harry's betrayal. William furious, Charles torn, the palace buzzing with whispers. And, as always, cut straight to the heart of the matter. You cannot let this stand, she's reported to have told Charles. Harry has chosen his path. He cannot rewrite the monarchy to suit himself. No frills, no hesitation, just truth. And didn't stop there. She turned her attention to William, the future king, the nephew she has always admired for his steadiness. And she gave him the words that would echo in his mind as he prepared his final move. Your duty is to your children. Protect them. Everything else comes second. That's in a nutshell. No talk of reconciliation. No hand-wringing over guilt or fairness. To her, the monarchy is survival. And survival means clarity. Harry had crossed a line. William had to defend his family. Simple, brutal, necessary. Let's take a step back and consider why Anne's voice carries so much weight. For decades, she has been the monarchy's hardest-working royal. More engagements, more charity work, more dedication than almost anyone else. She doesn't chase cameras. She doesn't seek headlines. She simply works. And because of that, her words are trusted. She has no agenda but the survival of the crown. No ambition but to see the institution endure. So when she spoke on Charlotte and Louis's behalf, her authority was unmatched. And there's something deeper here. Anne understands what it means to be sidelined. To be born close to power, but never quite in its grasp. She has lived her entire life as the sister of kings, the daughter of a queen, the aunt of heirs. She knows what it feels like to stand just outside the spotlight. And perhaps that's why she saw Harry's move for what it was, not a plea for justice, but a selfish attempt to rewrite his own bitterness through his children. And, blunt as ever, is said to have told Charles, "If you even consider this, you will lose William forever." Imagine those words ringing in the king's ears. A sister warning a brother that one son's plea could cost him the loyalty of the other. Charles wavered, and did not. And her clarity forced Charles to confront the truth he had been avoiding. There was no middle ground. He had to choose. And then, to William, she added one more sting. Harry is not your responsibility anymore. George, Charlotte, and Louis are. Don't waste your energy trying to fix him. For William, those words hit home. Because for years, he has carried the burden of being the older brother, of trying to keep Harry in line, of honoring Diana's wish that they remain close. But Anne shattered that illusion. Harry had chosen his path. William's duty was no longer to protect his brother. It was to protect his children. This is where the emotional weight deepens. William grew up watching Anne stand as a pillar of strength for the Queen, a woman who never complained, never wavered, never sought glory. And now, here she was, telling him to do the same. To stand firm. To make the hard choice. To put duty above sentiment, just as she always had. And William listened. Because when Anne speaks, she isn't just an aunt. She's the monarchy's conscience. But let's not underestimate the sting of her words to Charles. The king has always struggled with decisiveness. He bends. He hesitates. He worries about perception. And hearing his sister slice through the drama must have felt like a slap. Yet it was a slap he needed. Because without Anne's counsel, Charles might have drifted, hesitated, even considered Harry's plea. With Anne in the room, that option was dead. Now picture the scene at Clarence's house. Charles, pale and weary, struggling to balance guilt and duty. William, silent but seething, fists clenched, eyes locked on the floor. And Anne, standing tall, arms folded, delivering her truth. This is about the monarchy. This is about survival. Protect the line. Protect the children. Nothing else matters. Her voice ringing, final, unshakable. That moment crystallized everything. Charles knew he could not give Harry what he wanted. William knew he could no longer wait for his father to act. And the palace knew that Anne, once again, had cut through the noise and saved the monarchy from itself. But her words carried one more weight, a warning. If Harry continues, you'll need to make a choice. And that choice won't be between your sons. It will be between your heir and your spare. Between survival and collapse. That warning wasn't just for Charles. It was for William too. And William took it to heart. Because what Anne understood, and what William now accepted, was that Harry had forced the family into a war that could only end one way. And once William embraced that truth, his breaking point arrived. Which brings us to the next chapter. The moment the simmering rage boiled over. The moment William stopped waiting, stopped hoping, stopped forgiving. The moment he decided enough was enough. The moment of his breaking point.